that what progressivism was going towards is that the government should be involved in every situation.
Not in every situation, but that it could have a role to fit, if you define a problem, okay, and it's not just my hair is having a bad hair day, okay, but that there's a societal problem, poverty, alcoholism, whatever, that there could be government solutions that could aid the problem. They don't necessarily have to be the ones that solve all the problem entirely, but they will have a positive role in altering the situation.
Like prohibition?
Okay, yes, that would be, that's one of them. The temperance movement is going to be one of these. So what are these things and how are the solutions? Because progressivism was so large, in order to break it down, I've kind of classified it into three groups. Social progressives, economic progressives, and political progressives. And today I'm just going to give an overview of these three groups and then talk about what were the roots of progressivism, what were the things that were going on that made so many people think progressivism was a good idea. And then we're going to talk about specifically each of these individual things. Now, these are my classifications, okay? This is not, somebody did not walk around with a label, I am a political progressive, okay? I am an economic progressive. But in general, people who were political progressives tended to endorse a lot of the political progressive ideas. They may or may not have endorsed some of the social or economic ones, okay? And same thing, some of these overlap. There are certain economic progressive ideas that also overlap into social. There's some social ones that overlap into political, okay? So these are just models to help us understand. So let's give an example. Social progressives, okay? Social progressives tended to be ones that looked at social ills, health, crime, poverty, women's rights, any of these things, and say that those are things that needed to be examined and fixed. So, yeah, health, crime, women's rights, poverty, health included alcoholism, which they saw as a health issue, but also help for the mentally disabled. I mean, you name it. All these sorts of things were things that were part of this progressive ideal. And they felt, again, that there was a way to fix it. These progressives, the social progressives, were the most likely to have a religious flavor to they did. In fact, many of the things that they called social progressivism they referred to as their crusades. Okay, for example, the temperance movement was kind of a crusade. Okay, the second thing that was big was that more than any of these other groups, social progressives had very large percentage of women involved in these political and social movements. Okay, and that's where women became very involved in politics, was through social progressivism in the 20th century. Okay, so that's one section right there. A second section was economic progressivism. Economic progressives felt, as we said, there was this little hiccup or burp. It's hard to do twice in a row. I need a Dr. Pepper between burps. But these hiccups or burps in the system of capitalism. They said, yes, obviously monopolies, not a good thing, right? You know, that there's problems, labor problems and all that. So there are two kinds of sets of solutions. The majority of economic progressives were trustworthy. They were ones that felt that there was a positive role for the government in encouraging competition, that clearly the free market had not alone broken up these monopolies according to their view and according to the things that they'd seen, and they said there needs to be a role for the government in fixing that problem. But economic or progressives also looked at labor issues, things like child labor, labor safety, all the things that we've been talking about in the labor section. Economic progressives also felt there was a problem there and needed to be fixed. And the third thing that economic progressives tended to look at, I have completely forgotten right off the top of my head, and I'll get back to it as soon as it comes to mind. It was labor, it was, I can't believe that it just slipped my mind entirely.
What was the first one?
Monopolies. Monopolies, labor, there's one other, but it just, no, I'll get to it in a second, it'll come to me. I feel so bad. I've been doing this lecture 5 times, and all of a sudden I'm on tape. It's like, whoo! All right. Anyway, the minority of economic progressives had other issues that they were focusing in on. They said capitalism hadn't just hiccuped or burped, that it had broken in various different ways. That industrialism had created a tremendous amount of wealth inequality, and that it was just not going to be fixed by just tweaking capitalism. And these were the socialists. Okay, those who said that we needed to replace capitalism with socialism. Now, This is not a majority of the progressives, but neither is this some fringe group, okay? This is a part of the progressive movement. Now, in America, as a progressive thing, it's not as big as we're going to see like in Europe, and because most of the European countries that are post-industrial will embrace socialism, we will not, okay? And so but that's a lecture for another day. But that's right there, just the outline. The third group are political progressives. And political progressives said that the political systems were inherently corrupt at this point. The corruption came primarily, they said, from the political parties. The parties and the political machines that supported them. And so they wanted to create structural change in order to fix political problems by changing the way we voted, by changing who we voted for, by changing the way laws were made. They said this will clean up politics. This will end corruption, okay? And so those are political progressives, okay? So political, economic, and social. But so, for example, some of these overlap. For example, when we talk about child labor, that could be seen as a social thing from the health side. It could be seen as a economic thing from the labor side, okay? When you talk about women voting, that's clearly both a political thing and a social thing, where women's rights and politics overlap, okay? So these are just models, but generally they're helpful. And to be a progressive, you didn't have to endorse all progressive ideas. In fact, there will be some that like one type of progressivism, but are entirely opposed to another, okay? So there it is. So what are, yes?
The socialists, I'm sorry, was that under economic?
Yeah, and that's just my classifications, okay? And that's just my way of being able to break it down. It's just helpful in terms of looking at the models as to what they are, but you're not required to, it's just the way that I think it's helpful to group them, so. And in terms of economic solutions, you have those who just say, okay, let's do the trust busting, the labor thing, and all that. On the other side, they say, no, we've got to revamp the system entirely. It's not that he's tweaking it, he's overall, yeah.
Do the progressivism form their own party?
Yes, there will be a progressive party, but again, we'll get to that. But in terms of politics, originally progressives were seen as just a kind of a flavor of idea. And again, they're both in the Republican and Democratic parties. Roosevelt will be the first progressive president, Theodore Roosevelt, okay, as a Republican. But then you'll have Woodrow Wilson, who's actually slightly more conservative as a progressive, who's a Democrat. And you'll see both Democratic and Republican progressives as governors, which is where a lot of these guys come from. And so you'll have Hiram Johnson, who's actually kind of important in California history. You have from Wisconsin, Robert M. La Follette. But you'll have, as I say, and actually Wilson himself was a governor as well, governor of New Jersey as a Democrat. So you have both Republicans and Democrats being progressives. Later there will be a group that forms the Progressive Party, but we'll get there. Okay, at first it's just a wing of a party. Originally it's a wing of the Republican Party, but the Republicans will eventually reject it and kick the Progressives out. And so, but it was originally part of the Republican Party. But there were Democrats too, so that's why I say it's kind of confusing because we all want to say it's one party or the other, right? And it didn't quite work that way.
So it just had like an extra.
It was a philosophy, okay? It was a philosophy, a way of looking at things that could be seen in one way or the other.
But yet they were neutral between Democratic and Republican views?
I don't want to say they're neutral, but at various different times, Democrats or Republicans will more embrace different flavors of progressivism over time.
Okay.
Think of it this way. When we say, in terms of foreign policy, there are people who are isolationists today, right? Who say we should not be involved in foreign affairs. Some of those are Republicans, some of those are Democrats.
Oh.
It doesn't mean that is isolationism a Republican or Democratic thing. Well, depending on the time period, the war you're in, and who's the president, it depends on who it is. But it is a philosophy that branches and that appeals to certain wings of different groups of the parties. It might appeal to a Republican wing, isolationism, for one reason. It might appeal to a Democratic wing for an entirely different reason. But they might agree on the policy of isolation. Does that make sense?
Like James Weaver with the populists.
Yeah, okay, similar. But I mean, he was definitely a party member.
Okay,
Yeah.
right.
But we'll get to it. It'll make sense, I promise.
Okay.
Sort of. Okay. There. Okay. So now, so getting there, and I understand why it's confusing, because again, it's a philosophy more than, we want everything to be a party, right? Because that makes it easy. We want everything to be A or B, and sometimes the world is more multiple choice, and sometimes it's essay-based. Fancy that, okay? There it is. So, because of that, okay,